Awesome. I think it's working. I think we're live. We're here today with Melissa Acuna-Dengo, and we're trying to talk about a very focused topic, which is revolutionizing the education system. But this is really a huge topic, right? A huge problem to be solved. And Melissa has a lot of experience in terms of making change, right? Going from inner transformation to creating outer change in the world, the life you want to see. Melissa, tell us a little bit in a nutshell, what's your background, where you come from, and how does that tie back around to revolutionizing the education system?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess it starts with the fact that I've moved around pretty much my whole life. I've never lived anywhere longer than 4 years. So I personally, in my own education, I attended 10 different schools, right, all over the world. I got to experience both public and private schools, and I then became a school teacher, right? So I was working in the education system for several years, and I'm just, being really honest in my personal experience, I became really disheartened with it. And I just found that while I feel like the intention is there, in many, many ways, the education system, and it's not just in the US, although I will be honest that I have found it to be a little bit worse here, that it's failing children. And I'm just gonna make a really bold statement, but there's, and there's some people who do pretty well with it, right? However, there's so many pieces, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but that I found that just life skills and life values, right? Like problem solving, for example, right? It's one of the things that you're so passionate about that are really not being taught, right? And if we go back to the history of education and where it comes from, and, it was actually created to make good factory workers, right? If you actually think about that and what it is now, and that unfortunately tradition has been carried over time and not much has really changed, right? That I believe that huge changes need to be made. So coming back to, my background, like when I was teaching, I started learning, like I dove deep into personal development as a teenager because I have a mom who's very into personal development and spirituality. So it was kind of all around me. And I started reading some spiritual texts. I also read a lot of personal development books as a teenager. And then as a teacher, I was going through my own things, my own journey. And so I started learning mindfulness and meditation. And I brought it into my classrooms. And I worked with a lot of special needs kids. And the results that I saw were just phenomenal. I mean, I saw shifts in kids that I had not seen, in years of teaching. And I just started, I'm like, okay, I'm going to incorporate these techniques and I'm going to see what happens. And their response was really incredible, right? And teaching things like empathy and really deep mindful communication and cooperation, and teaching even 5-year-olds, right? Like the skills of problem solving was so huge. And you could see them really coming into their own and taking autonomy and being able to see their own strengths and skills in ways that they just weren't being given a chance to do otherwise. So it was really incredible. And I decided, okay, like this is what I want to do, right? I don't want to just be here, because I'm going to be very honest, I would butt heads with administration a lot. And so I decided to leave teaching, and it was a difficult decision, but I said, I really want to have a wider impact. So I left teaching and I started so I became a certified mindfulness and meditation teacher. That was kind of my starting point. So I started doing workshops for children and parents. And then I actually created a curriculum which included a lot more sort of really deeper values, also like identifying triggers, right? Like really deep self-awareness, and teaching children how to achieve that in order to then also improve communication and relationships. So I actually got into schools in New Jersey. It took a lot of work, but I started teaching 8 to 10 week programs in schools, and it was just beautiful. And then I had a really couple life-changing, life-altering years. I went through a near-death experience. So I was actually legally dead for 5 minutes. And when I came back, so much shifted for me. And I had actually died as a result of an anaphylactic reaction. So I used to have really severe anaphylactic allergies to the point where I couldn't socialize. Like I couldn't go to restaurants. I couldn't go to people's houses for dinner. Like basically anything that involved food, which is 99% of all interactions, right? So it was challenging to say the least, right? And as I started developing my intuition on a really deep level and coming into my own skills and things that I had maybe not been fully seeing, I was led to then go into this really powerful shift and transformation. So I actually discovered neuro-linguistic programming and also really deep subconscious mind work that helped me to release my anaphylactic allergies completely. So they're completely gone. And not just that, but I also actually healed my PTSD, which was crazy. And then that led me to just doing really deep trauma healing work with people. And I now work with both adults and children. And I am still so passionate about taking this work into schools because I believe that when we can, like I think it was Benjamin Franklin said that, right? It's easier to raise whole adults than like whole children than fix broken adults, I believe is the saying. I probably butchered it, but I really believe that we need to start young. We need to start teaching children these skills and these values. And if we can actually give them that awareness of how to tap into the power of their subconscious mind, how to use their intuition, how to do that deep work and understand themselves on a whole another level, then they're going to grow up to be like change makers, world leaders, and not only that, but they'll build a sense of resiliency that is needed in the world, right? And sorry for this, like bringing this heavy topic, and but I have been very surrounded by suicide in my life. It's kind of crazy, but I've met a lot of people who have lost people close to them, and I have lost 5 people really close to me, which is kind of crazy. But I also know that the purpose for that is that I am meant to do something about this. Like this is a huge part of my mission and vision in the world. And part of doing this work in schools and completely changing the education system, the way that children are raised and developed, is actually, in my mind, preventing suicide, because you're teaching people resiliency, you're teaching them joy, fulfillment, and you're actually teaching them that they are limitless. And so when they truly know that, they will no longer make these choices, right? Because sometimes people make them out of desperation, out of misery, and they believe that there's no other way out, right? So that's kind of, I know it was a lot. It was a big nutshell. But yeah, now with kind of combining, I forgot to mention, I'm also an intuitive energy healer. So I combine everything together, right? So it's my knowledge in, I've studied a lot of neuroscience and psychology. I studied psychology in college as well as education. And that combined with the energy healing side and then the subconscious mind work, so all the NLP and root cause release, I feel like bringing all of these things together and bringing them into schools is really going to make a huge change in the world. Yeah, that's my giant nutshell for you.
That was one giant nutshell, but man, it's you touch on everything that yeah, I can really see it being a big wedge that goes down to the topic of revolutionizing the education system, and then tying it back around to the life affirming stance against suicide, and making sure that this choice that we all have never becomes a necessary consideration, right? And yeah, there's all these topics, they've been on my mind over the past couple years as well. And I feel like there is a lot of untapped potential and a lot of room for research, especially as it comes to neuroscience and cognitive psychology and all of that. Psychology is always a little bit this field that's on the bridge between philosophy and science, and kind of the intersection, right? And it can get kind of strange and woo sometimes. And I mean, come on, you're talking about energy healing, and I know you mentioned another couple of like trigger words that for somebody who's like science based, which I am, this can be like really, oh, what are you talking about, right? But I know how to be open minded and explore that as well. And sometimes it's just a different labels we put on these things. Now, yeah. So let me actually ask you this, without wanting to be argumentative or too contrarian here, but let's say you have this vision for changing the education system, and what I understood just now is you wanna bring a bunch of woo-woo magic into schools that has no scientific foundation. Well, where do you even begin to point out that you are solving a legit problem in the education system, and how do you make it digestible to fit it in to the system that we have? Because it is necessary, right? I mean, you can change the system all you want, but you do want to be seen as an ally.
Absolutely. So yeah, no, I love that question, and I'm all good with the challenging. So. And it's funny because I'm someone who, like, I love science, right? And I've read a lot of science and I've studied it. And so it's really interesting. The more you actually dive deep, the more you find that there are a lot of scientific correlations. I mean, quantum physics, like, we don't need to get, actually explains a lot of these phenomenons, right? And a lot of the work that I do, you can actually, it's funny, I was actually working with a scientist and I was explaining to him, like, in his language. And so to answer your question, and I can actually answer it from the neuro-linguistic programming perspective, that, you need to speak a language that people will hear, right? So I think it helps that I am an educator. I still am. I mean, I'm not a school teacher anymore, but I understand the world of education. So when I was positioning my my curriculum, the one that I created, when I was going into schools in New Jersey, I mean, this took a lot, right? I had to do like meetings with superintendents and over and over, and then had to go and pitch to the PTA and the Board of Education. And there's a whole long line of hoop jumping, right? And fiery hoops. And what really helped me get through is actually, tuning down the woo a little bit, right? Because people don't understand it, right? And so, and a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions and fear around it, right? Especially if you're in a more sort of religious community, right? People tend to kind of, even meditation, right? Even meditation can feel woo-woo to people, which is interesting because, of course, it's very science-based, right? And so what I would do is I would actually bring the scientific research and I would come at it from an educational perspective, right? So, all right, so if our goal is to educate, right, and our goal is to maximize students' potential and increase, their cognitive abilities, right? Then wouldn't it serve if we gave them these tools, right, that help them to focus better, to, step into that self-awareness that allows them to have that metacognition, right? Because it's really, and that is something that educators are interested in, right? So when you bring it from this perspective, right, and what it can do, what are the benefits, what is it going to do for students, for learning, and for the teachers, right? And then I actually went and did a workshop for the principal and for the teachers in the school so that they would understand the concepts that I was bringing to them. Because of course, when you're coming in and you're saying, well, I'm going to do this program and I'm going to teach kids XYZ, they're a little hesitant, right? but the more you can speak their language and the more you can say, all right, here's what you're trying to do, right? And I appreciate, what you're trying to do. And here's something that is a bonus, right? Something that we can add to it, right? Because if I went in and started attacking the education system and saying, well, it's all crap and we need to just do away with it all, even though that might be what I feel, right? Nobody is going to listen, right? And so you start making incremental changes, right? Step by step. And as you start building in certain things and they start to see the benefits, because they do, I mean, it's really incredible. Like even the parents that were a little hesitant, right, in the schools that I went into, they started giving their feedback and saying the changes that they had noticed in their children. So, and as they start to see that, they start to open their eyes and they start to become a little bit more open to things, right? I mean, it's like, I know you were saying that, you're very scientific and you're a little more open, right? And I can probably guess that, not so long ago, you were less open, right? And maybe there was a little bit more skepticism. And as you've learned more, as you've grown more, as you've studied more things and you've met more people, you've become more open to it, right? And it's the same thing. I mean, I think with the education system, there are some people challenging it, but not that many, right? There's like some people that, like, I don't know if you ever watched the TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson. He's amazing. He did a TED Talk on do schools kill creativity? It's one of like the top viewed TED Talks. It's a really powerful one. And he's an educator. He's actually a pretty high level educator. And he talked about that premise of how schools are actually killing creativity. And it was a massive controversial hit, when I was a teacher. And I remember people talking about it almost like he was a traitor, right? Because he dared to speak, he dared to speak up about it. And, unfortunately what happens is there are a lot of technological changes that are happening, right, in the education system. And so with technological advances, okay, yes, they're making technological changes. So now you have smart boards in classrooms and whatnot, right? And so they think that the education system is actually advancing and changing. But if you actually look at the theory and the philosophy, it's really not changing that much, right? It actually, the basic premise still has not shifted as much as I personally believe it could and it should. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, totally. I love it. I'm vibing with all of this, and there's a lot of stuff coming to my mind as well, because I'm in the same space, right? I also have an educational background working with kids, and also background from all over the place. And so one thing that I'm seeing right now is, and I remember you told me that in the little snippet you sent me before we came on here, creating external change through internal alignment, or just doing the inner work, right, to create the external changes. And what you just described, right, we've created a lot of external changes, like with smart boards and who knows what kind of technology in the classroom, but some of the internal stuff hasn't quite caught up yet, right? And that's part of human evolution. That's probably needs to happen as well, externally as much as internally. But at the same time, I'm really interested right now in the external changes, because exactly what you're saying right now, when we talk about revolution in education, some of my kind of mentors and influencers talked about this too, where everybody's promising the next revolution in education, but at the end of the day, it never changes that much. And right, it's a lot in the cognition and what the human brain is even capable of processing. And then the big question, why in the first place? What you said, well, are schools supposed to transform, humans into factory workers, or what? And that's, if we're doing that, let's say everybody agrees that that's a good thing to do. Yes, we need to transform humans into factory workers. If we're doing that, well, we still need to change it, because factory workers are being robots now, right? And that's slowly happening, where just things are more and more automated. So what are we teaching people, and why, and what for? Now, you mentioned suicide as the bottom line, and that's a good lower limit, right? I mean, we want to make sure that people don't want to opt out of this life. But what about the opposite side? What are we moving toward? What's your perspective on all this?
So for me personally, I believe that we all have gifts. We all have unique, like, and I'm gonna say it very woo-woo, like a unique light to shine on the world, right? I couldn't have said it more woo-woo, but that's what I believe is that, you know, we all have our unique abilities and our unique gifts, and we have something to contribute to the world, right? I really believe that every single person on this planet has something to contribute, whether they choose to use it within, you know, their immediate sphere of influence and they make changes in that their environment around them that then ripples out, or whether they decide that they want to really take on this giant mission and make an even wider impact, right, really intentionally. That's up to them, right? But I believe that if we foster those unique gifts in children and help them to understand themselves on a really deep level from the beginning, and to cultivate that, cultivate creativity, cultivate self-awareness, cultivate self-understanding, where they're really choosing to look inside and say, oh, okay, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I care about. And then also even challenging children, and this is probably maybe a conversation for another day, but I actually did well, I'll give you a quick summary, but I did a project in New Jersey with a local Rotary group where we went into schools in the poorest area of New Jersey, where the literacy rate was lower than most third world countries. Yeah, like
in
really
America,
low.
in the USA.
Yes, this happens. Yes. So in this area in New Jersey, right, it's crime ridden, like the poverty rate is really low. Like people don't realize that these things exist, right, in the US. And their literacy rate was so low. And we challenged them. So we had this project called Dare to Be Great. And so we came in, we had a whole talk where we, you know, talk to the children about every single person having the ability and the capability to change the world. And we challenged them to be great. We challenged them to change the world. And so we said, you know, if you think about all the world's problems, right, and you put them all down, which one makes you the saddest? Which one makes you angry? Which one makes you want to stand up and say, that's not fair, right? And then when you pick that problem, then what can you do about it, right? And so this fourth grade class decided that they wanted to tackle world hunger, which is, I mean, amazing, right? And okay, we said, all right, and how are you going to do it? And we really like challenged them to think outside the box. But then we wanted it to be something that was going to be mutually beneficial in the sense that it was going to also help them to grow and develop, right? And because their literacy rate was so low, we challenged them to do like a readathon. So where they would actually, you know, read however many books, and then, you know, per book they would then raise a certain amount of money. And they went way beyond our expectations or what we had actually challenged them to do, and they ended up raising $10,000. And this is an area where their literacy rate was so low, and their literacy scores after this project increased by a huge amount. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was really incredible. And what was so beautiful too is that we got, because I had worked in many schools around the world, and so had other people. So we actually got kids from around the world to cheer them on. We sent them videos, you know, from kids around the world, like cheering them on and saying, you can do this. And then we had those kids, once they finished, challenge other schools around the world to do the same. And so they decided to donate their proceeds to Meals on Wheels, which is a really great organization. And they said, you know, we want to tackle world hunger. But then they also decided to do local community outreach. And that was completely their decision. So that's one of the things that I believe that we can do in schools, and is really encourage children to think so much further than them and to understand that, you are one part of this massive, massive, massive network, right? And that you have the capability to make a massive difference. And, if you start to foster that from a young age, you can actually raise and like develop leaders and change makers, right? And I'm not saying every single person in the world is going to step up and like, do something really huge, but I also believe that in your own community, you can make a massive difference. Like, just and seriously, just by changing one person's life, you're already making a huge difference. So I think it's encouraging that kind of thinking, that big vision thinking, that it's not really being touted at all in schools, right? It's like the biggest thing that they get to think about is, oh, what am I going to get on my next exam, right? Like, what score am I going to get? What percentage? Or, in the type of competition that's being encouraged too is one that I personally didn't agree with, because even as a kindergarten teacher, I was told to kind of pit my students against each other, to like make them have this competition for their next exam. And I said, well, how about we inverse that and we get them to compete with themselves, because that is what I believe the highest and healthiest level of competition is. And that's who I believe we should be competing against, right? It's not each other. Not that healthy competition is a bad thing. I mean, I'm all for marathons and, things like that. That's all good. But when we're constantly falling into the comparison trap and feeling less than because we're being told to compete with other people who, might be better at a certain thing, right? It's the whole, like, you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, right? Then obviously, you're going to think that fish failed, right? But if you judge it by its ability to swim, then that's a very different thing, right? And so I think that when we start to encourage that and to understand their uniqueness, because that's something else, and I don't want to get into like too many things, but I worked with a lot of special needs kids, and unfortunately I really feel that in so many ways, like it's people with learning differences that are being failed by the system. It's really that the way that the education system is set up right now isn't really set up to support them in the way that they need to be supported. And so that's also where people get lost and, get left to the side. And it's really painful to watch, to be honest. But yeah.
Well, lots of good stuff touched on, yeah. That last one too is not quite that much on my radar, but recently it came in a little bit, especially as, people that I look up to who are influential to me, kind of outing themselves as, well, I'm actually on the spectrum of some type of abnormality. And so it's like, then it makes you wonder, what is even normal? why do we even, why do we label all these differences? And that's what I've come to almost conclude, is that there's probably no such thing as normal. Everybody's on some spectrum of something. But that's just my personal opinion. I have nothing to really back that up yet. But what I found overall interesting in a summary for what you're describing, and I'm all about that as well, is unlocking human potential.
Yes.
Right? Because I mean, if we look right now at if I look at entrepreneurship, for example, right, only the top 0.001% of entrepreneurs or whatever really succeed big, and there's such a huge risk of failure in entrepreneurship. That's just one example, but the same thing goes about across many things in our society, where it's just, I wonder if we could just do better if we channel all ourselves and kind of work better together. And one of those things is, competition. I mean, competition is great. There's some benefits to it, competing with yourself, competing with each other friendly. But then if you look at, big world problems like war, like that's a competition. Do we really need that competition? Is that really a healthy competition for countries to be fighting each other when they could be working together, right, as one human race or something like that? Yeah, so lots of good stuff touched on. I'm wondering now, if somebody else is watching this right now and it resonates with them, how can they support you? What is something that somebody could do right now to contribute to your mission and make sure these changes in the education system get implemented?
That's a great question. And oh man, it's like I have to think. I mean, I think part of that is when you, and this is kind of the first thing that sort of comes up for me. And I mean, of course, please reach out to me. And I have a lot of like collaborative opportunities and things. But I think on a daily basis, right, one of the big things that is really important to me is that being really mindful. So when you're interacting with children, right, in really coming at it from like helping them to achieve a growth mindset. And this is something that, I mean, I could have gotten a little bit more into, but it's helping them to see, their abilities, their strengths, their talents, and asking powerful questions that help children to open and expand their minds. And like you said, get to that potential. And then, yes, I'm working on, I mean, this is a little bit in the future, but through the work that I'm doing, I want to create an NGO that actually does a lot of this. And so we go in and we'll create schools and we'll go into schools. And but yeah, I mean, I would be happy to chat to anyone who's interested, or, if anyone wants to reach out to me, you can reach out to me here on Facebook or via my website. If you want, I can put it in the comments. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just, being really mindful about how we interact. I think that for me is really huge because, especially children, we're constantly modeling, right? We're constantly picking up and soaking things in, and they're learning and growing through everything that they experience around them, everything that's thrown at their neurology. So, just as adults interacting with children, to just be really mindful with how you're coming across and how you're showing up.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And the change, how do you say it? Be the change you want to see in the world, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. One question pops to my mind just now as you were describing that just now. And I'm all about the contrary and the yin yang again, the oppositional forces. I think there's a lot of momentum to be created. You mentioned creating a nonprofit organization, right? Now, personally, right now, I'm launching a for-profit venture. What's your take on that? Profit, business, nonprofit? We can even open the box to socialism, communism, capitalism. I don't know, but what's your take? What makes you choose a nonprofit organization in that, or is it because there is no opportunity to make profit? Do you think profit is a bad thing? I don't know. Tell us your perspective on that.
No, not at all, not at all. So I have my own business, right? I'm an entrepreneur, and of course I make profit, right? And no, I don't see profit as a bad thing at all. In fact, so I've just had this idea of having a nonprofit because of also a lot of the, not just like the benefits, the support, the donations, and also the way that it's viewed. So I feel like when you have a nonprofit approaching a school, there's a different way that it is viewed and received. So, a nonprofit saying, okay, like, we want to come in and we want to do this work with the children, right? It's going to have a very different like reception, right? And I've seen that. And so for me, I believe in both, and I believe that they both have merit for sure. And I think for me, like my for-profit business is going to support my nonprofit, right? That's my goal. And so
clever, very clever.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't at all. I'm not like capitalism is evil or anything like that, but yeah, and I don't know that we want to get into a full political discussion here, but I mean, it's funny. I think that maybe in the past I did, right? I had a lot of beliefs that I have worked through and that I have been releasing and rewiring, right, in my own subconscious around money and profit and business even. Because interestingly, my first degree was actually in business, but I had such a resistance to it, which is really interesting. I know. And now, coming full circle, I really appreciate that. I appreciate having that background because it has really helped me when, running my own business. And I actually see business in a very different light, and I could see it as a platform through which we can make changes in the world, right? And I think that before I had all of these preconceived notions, right, around, potentially, business owners being greedy and evil, whatever, all of that, right? But that's in the past for me. I think for me, just an NGO is a vehicle to really enter the education system. I think that's the summary.
That's great. It's a great trick, actually. It's exactly like you said earlier, too. You got to speak the language of your audience to meet them where they're at and everything. And so in that manner, it's, it's like if you assume that humans are inherently good, then the method through which this goodness, this unlocking of potential is happening, this moving forward doesn't really matter, but it just needs to fit whatever pathways exist and whatever the system is currently like, including if you want to change that system, right?
Yes.
Right. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was awesome.
I look forward to being actually in touch with you a little bit more because the work you're doing does tie right into a lot of my interests as well. So I see a lot of room for collaboration if you're open to that. But we'll talk about that privately. Thank you so much for being on again. This was a great conversation about changing, revolutionizing the education system and all that's involved, including the woo-woo stuff. Pretty interesting. Thanks a lot for your time. And we'll be in touch, okay?
All right. Bye.
Take care.